expand both of those. We're thrilled to be partnering with the Field Museum today, and we have to thank Deborah Yeppa-Pappen for a million different things, but particularly for being able to be here today. She is the museum's community engagement coordinator, and she also happens to be on the Illinois Humanities Board. And we are especially thrilled to be focusing our book groups, programs, thoughts, and spirits to engaging with Indigenous stories. In organizing this series, we've done our best to center the experiences, creativity, and testimony of Native people through their own voices. We also go in with the humility to recognize that hearing and honoring one another's stories is not always easy, but is essential to do so if we want to build understanding. Finally, we want to acknowledge that we are on stolen and occupied land. And hopefully you went through the exhibition in the other room to learn a little bit more about what that means. The land and waters we identify as Chicago were home to people of Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Odawa nations, as well as many other tribes such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee nations. Today, Chicago is home to the third largest urban Indian population, representing more than 100 different tribal nations. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. I think I did this in order, actually. Maybe I already predicted how you would sit. On the far right, Monica Rickard-Bolter is a Chicago-based visual artist and journalist of Potawatomi, Black, and German descent. Passionate about storytelling through art, she advocates for cultural representation in any project she undertakes. Monica pays homage to her White Pigeon family name as a journalist and writes to amplify Natives in the arts. Monica is also a co-founder of the newly established arts nonprofit Center for Native Futures, which is also includes Deborah, and is also a partner for the Big Read. And there she will use her decades worth of nonprofit experience to create a more inclusive and equitable arts community throughout the city. Brian Vayo is next. He is a member of the Pueblo of Acoma in New Mexico. He recently completed 3 terms as governor of his tribe. Brian has dedicated over 30 years working on sacred sites protection, repatriation of ancestors, and their associated funerary items, historic preservation, language revitalization, cultural tourism, and the arts. He's very busy. Brian works with museums throughout the country and internationally as a consultant on exhibit development, collections, stewardship, education, and policy. A self-taught potter and painter, Brian is inspired by historic Pueblo pottery forms and designs, as well as the cultural and natural environment of Acoma. So we're really lucky that he's here. He's leaving town later tonight, so I'm glad that you were able to join us. Jason Wiesaw is next. He is a multidisciplinary artist, creating works in an array of media, including ceramics, drawings, textiles, and traditional cultural pieces. His projects are informed by the land and relate stories that are rooted in place and the acknowledgement of spirit. He balances being a maker with working in his tribal community as a peacemaker, sustaining cultural ceremonies, and sharing traditional knowledge across the Great Lakes. He also, by the way, drove here through the snow. Jason is Potawatomi, Turtle Clan, and lives near the historic Pokagon Potawatomi settlement of Rush Lake in southwestern Michigan. He has 3 children and a network of family, friends, and ceremonial relatives from across Turtle Island. He creates art for markets, galleries, and exhibitions, and his work is in the permanent collections of the Ida Yorg Museum in Indiana, Grand Valley State University, Michigan, and the Newberry Library, which is also a partner for the Big Read in Chicago. And finally, Deborah Yeppa-Pappen, who is our moderator today, is the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Native American Exhibit Hall at Field Museum. She is also co-founder of the Center for Native Futures and a board member at Illinois Humanities. Deborah is Korean and a tribally enrolled member of the Pueblo of Jemez. She is an artist with international acclaim in the field of contemporary Native American art, and through her artwork and her work at the Field Museum and Center for Native Futures, she is committed to changing inaccurate representations of Native people and advocates for the inclusion of Native first voice and perspectives. We are so lucky to have this group with us today, and I'm going to turn it over to them so we can hear their voices.
Thank you so much, Becky. And thank you, Illinois Humanities, for reaching out and wanting to share Native truths with everyone here. Hopefully you all had a chance to go in and take a look. We're going to talk here a little bit about, just some of the process and our experience that went into creating Native Truths. But first, I want to welcome you all to the Field Museum. Thank you so much for being here. As Becky said, yeah, all of a sudden it's sunny and clear out, and I don't think any of the snow has stuck. But thank you for coming out on this cold day, and hopefully it's warm enough in here for you. So we're going to get a little cozy over here as well. So I'm really, really happy and honored to have, our Native Truth collaborators. But, for me, they're more than collaborators. These folks are my friends, and we've been friends for quite some time. Some of us before the project, some of us met, because of my work here at the museum. But we're all friends nonetheless. So the way that I want to, we're not going to do a traditional formal panel discussion where I ask a series of questions and they each answer. I kind of want this to, I'm more comfortable, having conversation. And I just want to have a conversation with my friends here. So imagine we're sitting in a coffee shop, we're sitting at a table, meeting up because we haven't seen each other in a while, and we're just kind of catching up on things about Native truths. And you all are at the tables around us, and you get to listen in on our conversation. So that's kind of how I want to go at it. Hopefully we can ask each other questions too, and just engage in that way. Though I do have, so I might have to do this too, and just, I do have some images too that we'll share. But so with that, I'm not scripted or anything. I don't have like a list of questions that I want to ask. So hopefully if you guys have questions, just ask them, of each other. So, hey guys. Good to see you guys. How are you guys doing? Um, I'm good. I'm good. It's so good to see you guys as always. I guess like one of the first things that, I guess just kind of reflecting on my own experience and how I became involved with the Field Museum. And you all know the story, but like, there was a time where I did not want to be affiliated with this museum. As a Native person, coming in to see the old Native Hall, it was just so, it didn't represent me, right? It didn't represent us. And I thought it was always just this embarrassing place to bring people to, so we always avoided it. And yet, here I am. I'm a staff member. I'm working for the Field Museum, working on this exhibition, or finished exhibition. But why did you guys want to work with the Field Museum? I mean, was it like, yeah, cool, let's do this, or was there some kind of hesitation? Um, Whoever wants to.
I can jump in on that. For me, when I was invited to take part in this exhibition, and you and I have talked about this before, but my first time coming to the Field Museum was over 25 years ago, and I came here with a group of elders from my community on repatriation business. So we had ancestors, the bones of our ancestors in the collections and in that dark, cold vault downstairs. And so when I came here with them that many years ago, it's really heavy work. And I was the youngest person in the group at the time. So when, to fast forward a couple decades, and I'm not that young person anymore, but I feel like I was taught a certain way within our community to represent us out in the larger world. So when I was invited and contacted by you in the Field Museum to take part in this, I almost felt like it was a way to give a voice into some of those deeper issues that happen at institutions. So not just like as a gig or an opportunity to show art, but as an opportunity to talk with you guys about how much work these institutions still need to do in order to represent us properly, because that's what they're trying to do here, right? They're trying to represent stories of cultures and places all around the world. But if it's not being done accurately, then I think we have an obligation, because of our elders and our ancestors and the future young Potawatomi or the future young Chicago Native community, that we speak up for them. So that's what really motivated me to do it. It was like kind of like closing that circle and trying to turn something that originally was a real negative or heavy thing, try and turn it into positive voice.
So I'm a big old nerd, and I love anything to do with museums. And when the opportunity presented itself to actually become involved and volunteer here with Deborah back in 2017, I jumped at it and really wanted to get involved. But I had avoided the Native Hall for a very long time. I can't even remember the last time I had been in there until I started volunteering. And just seeing all the changes that really needed to happen. So, we got to talking, having conversations, checking in with people, and just seeing how, like, people just weren't paying attention. And it's like, how do you make that more engaging? How do you actually share these stories, and what is going to be the most effective way to do that? The old hall was a straight line, and now you have to kind of like weave in, and like you have to see us. So it's been really great to just see it all come together, and all the different voices that actually were able to come to some sort of cohesive like narrative for certain sections and different things. So it's been really nice.
You successfully repatriate the ancestors?
It did, but not until 5 or 6 years ago. So if I was here, right around the changing of the century, around 2000, it took another 15 plus years. And we always ask ourselves why.
Right.
The legislation is there, oftentimes the protocol is there. These negotiations or these relationships that we build, it takes time to do that. So, but we don't always feel like it's reciprocal.
Right.
Like they're still trying to keep them doors closed when they see us come up knocking.
Yeah, that was my first experience with the field as well. And I think it was 1995. I came here on at the time I was the director of my tribe's historic preservation office, and we coordinated a NAGPRA visit to come out here to the field, and it was freezing cold, I remember. And I was with three of our religious leaders and one of our lieutenant governors from the tribe at the time, and it was so cold. And we caught a cab over here, and what I remember from that morning was when we arrived, we were standing in the hall, and no one was there to welcome us or greet us. We were kind of just looking around and kind of overwhelmed and trying to thaw from the short walk. And it was very telling that we stepped into a space that was not welcoming, that was not ours. It was very overwhelming. And my first thought was to find out where the individual was that we were supposed to meet, or was supposed to meet us, and to get some coffee. So finally, after even asking the security guard at that time, who had no idea that we were even going to be here, took some time. So almost like 45 minutes had passed, and the individual finally showed up. And so we didn't get the coffee, but we proceeded to go see the collections, and we had, based on the inventory that had been shared with us, had identified about 30 items that were objects of cultural patrimony. We didn't want to interact with the ancestral remains because we were still in a process of working with other tribes at that time to determine if they were in fact from Acoma or if they were from neighboring Pueblo tribes. Anyway, so long story short, uh, we we saw the items and it was very uh, problematic on several fronts, and it was really interesting to me that the staff here had absolutely no idea how to interact with us. We were like visiting from a foreign country or something, and the questioning was odd. The just the demeanor of folks was really off. But one of the things that, after we had the chance to see the collections, we were leaving, and the gentleman who is the leader of our clan system um, said in our language, "Well, hold on, I need to go back." And said, "Okay." So I went with him, and then the one of the other cultural leaders followed. And when we got to the space where this particular item that he was concerned about, very concerned about, was located, he turned to me and told me, "We have to take this back today." And I didn't know how to respond to that. And I just said, "I'm sorry, but there's no way that we can take it today." And he just broke it down into and started crying and was talking to the item, um, and I just tried to comfort him, and we left. And just as we were leaving, that shelf just started to shake and rattle. And I said, "Okay, well, we this item is very much alive." And so we had made some recommendations and requests that day, and just like you, it wasn't until I think 1999 that we finally had coordinated the return of that item as well as a few other pieces, objects. And that stayed in my memory for quite some time as I continued this work around repatriation. And I never came back to the field after that. And it wasn't until, fast forward to almost 30 years later, when I'm working as the director of the School for Advanced Research, Indian Arts Research Center in Santa Fe, that we were working on some guidelines, some basic protocols for museums and communities to consider as they're thinking about working together and collaborating on any and all issues. Um, and the curator at the time, Alika Wali, contacted me, and she came across the guidelines and said thank you. So these are something that we really need, and I'd like to talk to you more about this because we are going to embark on the rehabilitation of the Native American Hall. And I thought the first thing that came to mind when she mentioned that was, I do remember the buffalo, right? That stuffed buffalo, and I said, "Oh, okay, that's exciting, I guess." So anyway, long story short, that really was the beginning of this relationship that I've had with the Field Museum. I serve as a member of the advisory committee, Native American Advisory Committee. So we've been engaged the last 6 years in the development of the Native Truths. And we just completed a meeting yesterday of a new group of advisors, some who have returned and some new members, to address some of these other issues, including repatriation and other significant issues that are still pending. And we realize that we can't change the museum, we can't shift its culture, but we want to ensure that that Native voice is still a part of the exhibition, and that there is a place at the table for Native people, because we need to influence some of the decision making here. There are long-standing issues and long-standing problems with collections, and these need to be resolved. And this is really the first step towards, I hope, realizing that there's more access and there's more protection of these items that continue to sit in shelves in a dark space below us that need to return to their respective tribes. Sorry for that long answer.
No, that is really good because I think that that's a really good, both your stories are very good examples of, just the exhibition is, it's for us, it's more than just an exhibition. It's more than just, the space with stories, with representation, more appropriate and, proper representation of Native people. I mean, this project went so much deeper in addressing and challenging a lot of those issues that exist. And the exhibition, I think, is like just, it's kind of one of those, it's a first step toward kind of repairing some of that harm. Um, but it still doesn't repair all the harm because there's still so much more work that needs to be done. And that's why we have, our advisory committee, and, hopefully they have more of an influence. Although we do have Native staff members as well, sometimes it's hard for us on the inside to try to fight some of these fights. We need, the help of outside, the advisors and other collaborators that, you know, like you guys, like I saw that potential for change, or that, like, here's an opportunity to make a difference and to change the narrative and bring it back to our, give ourselves agency, our own community, the agency to direct the, where the exhibition's going to go. So were there moments though where, I guess, like, what are the happy moments? I mean, was there something, what are the positives that, part of the process for you? Anyone?
Well, for me, like I said in my earlier statement, it was almost like coming around full circle. And in creating a piece for this exhibition, and in fact, in all the work that I show, the work is, to me, like a safer, more kind of like dressed up entry point to deeper and oftentimes harder conversations that need to be had. So the exhibition, as beautiful and powerful as it is, it's not just an art show for us. It's more of like when the visitors are invited into that space, it's to look at things, but hopefully it's to trigger in their minds how they think about us, how they view us, not just in the past, but in 2022, or how do they view us in the future. So it's more of like an opportunity to open up these dialogues with the general public, but then also with the institution. So I took that as like a challenge, as an opportunity, as a means to speak for people in my community that maybe hadn't been asked to speak before. So for me, that definitely was a positive, and in that spirit is how I moved to come to the object for which is in the gallery next door.
Which is right. I put it up on the screen. So
Yeah.
if you want to talk a little bit about that too, and tell us
Sure.
about the meaning behind that. Because I remember when you presented this idea and your proposal for this piece was just, I remember reading it and I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's so powerful. We need to have that piece. And I remember you kind of being a little hesitant and saying, I'm not sure if the Field Museum or this exhibition is the right place for this piece. And Ryan Schisler, who is one of our exhibition developers, like, he and I were just like, yes, no, we need this piece.
Yeah, and I've often said it, that in the exhibition there is an immense amount of beautiful work, and the beautiful work represents these really powerful stories. However, I don't feel like my work is a beautiful work, but it does have a story that resonates, not just in my community, but I think in a lot of tribal communities all throughout North, South America, indigenous communities everywhere. So this rugged stool, the green part that is has paint chipped away and is actually quite wobbly. That stool sat in the Catholic Church that was erected on my community's sacred lands back in the mid-1800s. So that Catholic mission was built there in order to try and convert us from our traditional Potawatomi ways into Catholic or Western religious ways. And so, you know, way back then, our people were already being not just encouraged, but forced away from our traditional way of connecting with spirit, of connecting with the Creator, of connecting with the only lifestyle and form of prayer that we ever knew. And we were being forced into these churches, you know, and forced to learn those ways and leave our own ways behind. This stool, as rugged as it is, has a lot of strength and beauty in it, and I think it represents resilience. So it had stayed within my family and had been passed down through the generations and had come to me some years ago, and I didn't know what to do with it. For a while it sat in the basement, for a while it sat in my studio, and then it went into the storage unit. And then when this project came about, which came about during the pandemic, so like everybody was like hunkered down at home and like had extra time to think about things that perhaps they never thought about. And that's when I became inspired to turn this stool into the piece that would be included in the exhibition. So I harvested, those little spikes there are from clay that was harvested in the river there that in the town that I live in, our ancestral homelands. And so I fashioned those spikes and I dipped them in 24 karat white gold, which it looks silver, and then fired them and affixed them to the piece. And the whole idea behind that piece was that a person literally would not be able to sit in that stool anymore without like hurting themselves, making themselves bleed. You know, it's impossible to sit in. So my thinking in that was that, you know, it's okay now to embrace once again those traditional ways of how we pray and how we come together as a community, that our ways always were good enough. And the things that they taught us for generations of bastardizing us and making us feel like savage and cutting our hair and taking our ancestral remains and our sacred items and putting them in places like this because we weren't good enough as human beings. Like that piece to me says that we are good enough, that we always have been good enough, and it's okay to come home to our fires, that you don't have to sit there anymore. And so that piece is beautiful in the story if it's not beautiful as an object. It has a spirit, and that object is alive, and that's what Brian was talking about when his elder walked into that place and it started moving, is because those objects have a spirit and they have a life force that when they are amongst kindred people, they come back alive again and it makes them happy. That's why they want to come back home. And I want our people to come back home to our traditional ways. So that's why I crafted that piece and put it here, kind of as like a calling to our own people to come back home.
Could you say the pronunciation of that piece? I love the
Yeah,
title.
Gago Iba Jeep de Bukkan, which means do not, or literally like you can't sit there. Because at one time, you know, for a very long time, they told our people that we couldn't sit around the fire, that we couldn't offer our medicines in that way, that we couldn't call Kishem Nado, or the Great Spirit, that we had to call him God or Jesus.
I think that's why that does make that piece perfect for this exhibition, because the Field Museum at one time was one of those places where, well, I mean, it still is, right? In the collection still holds a lot of our relatives, a lot of items that don't belong here. And there was also a time when Native people were only brought into the museum in a certain way as well. You know, like we were brought in to perform or to you know, like to play Indian, right? So whereas now we're coming in as who we are, and we're sharing who we are today, but showing how we're still connected to our past. And I think, you know, the Chaco story, hopefully you all saw this piece, Jason's piece in the We Speak for Ourselves section, and the Chaco story as well. I mean, I think that story, which Brian was a co-curator on, is a very good example also of just, you know, how, you know, we talk about our history, our past, but we're not so disconnected from it. We're still so very connected from it. And that is a common theme all throughout the exhibition. I actually have a photo of, here, I'm gonna get up for a sec, of the cape that, if you wanna, there, the beautiful Acoma cape. What's the story behind that?
Before I answer that question, I want to go back and talk about the happy times. So, um, so what I thought was really great about this process is once those of us who became engaged as advisors got to know each other and understood collectively what our responsibilities were, which we, I think, crafted on our own also. We didn't necessarily follow the field, what the Field Museum had envisioned for this process of engaging with Native American advisors. We considered it, but we didn't necessarily follow it and or implement it. So I thought one of the really great things was that eventually the leadership and the staff that we were engaged with kind of stepped back and just started to listen. And it took a series of meetings to get to that point, but when it did happen, I thought, okay, we can breathe easier now and we can really move forward with this process from an Indigenous perspective. And that our recommendations around inclusion and really expanding involvement with Native American and other Indigenous peoples, artists, cultural leaders, scholars, museum professionals, all of these people that we felt needed to be engaged in this process became engaged. And that their voice and their stories became integrated in some way into the exhibit. And one of the great things also is that the exhibit features contemporary Native art. We didn't think that, I think in the early stages, that we were even going to realize that, because it was about presenting what is in the Field Museum's collections. And again, keeping it in that kind of historic context and not really celebrating the development and evolution and the contributions of our people in this exhibit. So once we got to the point where art was being commissioned, the museum was actually purchasing art, they were talking to contemporary artists, reaching out beyond Chicago, that was huge. It was very uncomfortable for the museum, but it happened. I thought that was just great. And when we had the opportunity as advisors to get to know the Native American community of Chicago, when we were invited to their center to ask them for their ideas, and they spoke loud and clear and were excited for that opportunity, that was another happy moment. Plus they fed us some really good food, and it was just really, really exciting to be engaged with the people. And then there's that opening day. There were a series of openings. But that time in the auditorium with the song and the people, which I think we all as advisors were envisioning something very similar about what that day would look like or be like, what the feelings might be, the voices and the sounds and the smells, and it came to life in a big way. it was very emotional for a lot of people. And for Native people to be represented in that way on that day and to really take ownership of this hall was really, really special. What was also special was the opportunity to select this piece from the collections. It's a Acoma woman's cape. It's a very rare example of Acoma textile, I don't want to call it art, but the textile making tradition, weaving traditions. And it's very rare in that the design that's embroidered onto this cotton textile is, as far as we know, there are only 2 examples of this particular design. And what was really important to me as an Acoma person was to display this as it would be worn. And even while it is fragile, even while the conservators were not in agreement with the display of this cape in this way, we were still able to get it done. And that was a really great moment. And I'm so happy that it's in the exhibit. One of the, and lastly, I'll just, I get so long-winded, I'm sorry. One of the other great things was when some of us insisted that we be here to participate and observe in the deinstallation of those items that were on display for almost 70 years. And so the gentleman from Hopi tribe in Arizona and myself were here that day, and for that section, the southwest section, and the pieces that, there were 7 items from Acoma, all damaged. And it was just, my heart sunk when I saw that these items were just nailed to a 2x4. And you know, our process at home when we use these items like this cape in ceremony is that we, after they're used, we give them time to rest or to stretch, as we say. And that was a request that I had made on behalf of my tribe, was we need to give these items time to rest, and this is how we want them to rest while they are here. And one of the requests that I made was that we take, or that I take, at least 2 of these items outdoors. When I first suggested that, the conservator's mouth dropped, of course, and everybody kind of froze. But after explaining why it was important to do that, they accommodated that request. So I had the opportunity to take one of the textiles and a piece of Acoma pottery outdoors. And when we got the items outside and did my prayers and things, it started to sprinkle. Of course, the conservation team was even more mortified at that point, but I was just, I was so happy. Yes, I was like, yes. So if an institution like this, who has just a history of unwillingness and really a wall that they've built, can make changes like this, can accommodate these needs of our communities and of these items that do have lives of their own, then we're on to something. And when we have artists, contemporary artists, who are also contributing and telling their story and representing a history and a culture of their own through their art, and that those can be incorporated into an exhibit in an institution like this, the door has been opened in a very profound way.
Yeah, and that's a really good seg into now, there's a lot of contemporary art in here, and I think you're right that that wasn't something that they really expected to incorporate, but yes, at the request of all the visitors, all the native visitors that I would bring through, and asking people, what do you want to see in here? Everyone says, art, contemporary art. We want to see what people are making now. And I think, as contemporary native people, we're all artists up here. We all create, we all make. And I think, that's just something that art is just so embedded and so much a part of our communities and where we come from and who we are as a people. So it's unavoidable for us to have art in here. There's actually 400 items on display, and about 50 of those items are new pieces. So newly commissioned pieces, or more contemporary pieces that we borrowed from other museums and galleries. But I want to give Monica the opportunity to talk about your art. So as you're talking, I'm going to kind of go through some of the images so that, because and that has to be a happy moment for you, right? I mean, because I know that you've gotten so much attention for all of your art, which your art is in so much of the space in the We Speak for Ourselves section, which is amazing, because that's another thing that we talked about during the development, was making sure that we have representation of Chicago-based artists and Great Lakes peoples, which you represent, Potawatomi people. So I'm gonna, as you're talking, I'm gonna just kind of show through, and then you tell me which one you want to focus more on.
So yeah, like I was thinking back to some conversations Deborah and I would have about when the hall changes, what should be on display, what can people share? Because a lot of times Native people are like, that's not supposed to be on display, you shouldn't have that out, this and that. So wanted to create things that could be shared, that didn't necessarily, just belong to, just the tribe itself, but like these are greater stories that we can share. And I ended up creating these big murals, which I'm still kind of blown away. I've never seen my work this big before, so that was like, okay. So I went to school for animation, but really didn't like it. So dealing more with the fine art realm has been very different for me, but I try to incorporate some of that into some of the works. So a lot of these are hand-drawn. They were done on 9x12 pieces of paper, scanned in, and then digitally composed in Photoshop. And this one in particular is part of the larger Great Lakes mural, if you see on the We Speak for Ourselves section. I wanted to create a story that, pretty much all of us can relate to. I mean, we're surrounded by the Great Lakes here, and I've always been close by to Michigan, Lake Michigan. I come from Michigan, moved here to Chicago, and I really wanted to do something that would actually give back to the lakes and actually say, we're really appreciative for everything, all the life, all the abundance that you do actually give and represent. So the Great Lakes mural is all about personifying the lakes themselves and saying, now what if they were able to discuss the human problem and really get into, they're not taking care of us, they're polluting the lakes, they're encroaching on our space, and we don't know how to speak to them. So in this one, in the first panel, we have all the lakes gathered around, and in the center is Lake Michigan. In the upper left is Lake Superior, and the lower bottom is Lake Huron, and then upper right is Erie, and then Ontario. And they, Lake Superior ends up suggesting you should go talk to Sky. And Sky is obviously very pissed. Did not care for anything that the humans are doing, saying that they see all and they're not taking care of anything. Like, they just don't put in the effort and they don't try to preserve and conserve. And particularly in the last couple of years, Chicago has experienced a lot of tornadoes. So you're seeing these funnel clouds and storm clouds. So Sky is red. But Lake Michigan is trying to stay hopeful and say, they're not going away. We have to figure out something in a way to talk to them. So Sky very reluctantly, if you want to go back to that, agrees to help. And then all the lakes get back together. But this time, these are all documented lake effects that have gotten worse over the years. So like Lake Superior has these really extreme icy frozen waves that are very dangerous for people. One thing you know about Great Lakes, they're very temperamental. There's a lot of shipwrecks and different things that happen. Like Lake Erie, actually we just found out this morning that there's going to be like 5 feet of snow that's going to come off the lake. So that's just, yeah, that cloud of mess. That's what that represents. And then Ontario has these really extreme gusts of wind that are coming off of it. Lake Michigan the water levels keep rising. So it's almost like she's reclaiming certain areas. And if you know Chicago's history, after the Chicago fire, a lot of that just got dumped into the lake. And I feel that she's probably pretty pissed about that. And in a way, this is kind of her reclaiming. And I didn't actually mean to make all the lakes women in particular, but it's just something that kind of happened. The color schemes even were just like specifically from those lakes, like looking at different images of them, like you can just see they all seem to have a different personality and other colors that really just pop and can change as the day progresses. And as you saw, like the weather's just constantly shifting. And Lake Michigan in particular, I feel like she's always shifting the way she looks. So, but the border around this also is sweetgrass and a copper bowl, which is very representative of healing medicine, particularly for Anishinaabe people. So I wanted to end on a hopeful note that just because these things are getting worse, like they're trying to speak, and there is something that we can do about it if we take the time and try to heal. So that's a little bit.
That's such a beautiful story. And I think it also shows that, I mean, there's space in this exhibition for new stories, right? Like, I wonder if there was a moment where maybe they were hopeful that we would be, because I know sometimes like from non-native visitors that come through, they're always, not always, but sometimes they're like, well, where are the legends? Where are the, they're looking for like those old stories. But, we can point them to this and say, well, here's a new story. Here's a new story, and, we have space for that. Was there any, like, what was that process for you? Like, what was the ask from you?
They just said, hey, you want to do a mural? I'm like, okay, sure. And it's like, how big is it? Okay, all right, let me try to figure out how to tell a story with that. So yeah, like I broke it down into those different panels, but something like I've always been drawn to was the spirit realm. My mom, growing up Pentecostal, my mom was always kind of like, maybe we should stay away from that, but I'm an adult, so I can do whatever I want. So I just kind of tapped into that, and there was one day in particular that I kind of had a moment, I felt, with Lake Michigan. I was like, ooh, I got to tell a story about you, and just started getting some different images coming to mind, and like I specifically don't, when I do the spirit characters, I don't put a lot of facial features because that's not what it's about. It's more about that essence and what they're about and what they're bringing. So yeah, this was a really interesting process and trying to figure out some of the spatial mechanics of it, but I really like how it came together.
I really like how it came together too, and I know that I had a chance to tell you, but my piece being more rugged and sharp and like real rough around the edges and stuff, I was so happy when I found out where my piece was going to be placed and that Monica's work was going to be around it, because we're both Potawatomi, so kind of like there was that balance there between beauty and ruggedness, male, female. There's just different things at play there that in so many ways in these spaces and in our cultures, there's like a spirit that drives things. Like we may create things based off of our own ideas or like what we want it to be, but there's always the spirit behind things that kind of makes it what it's supposed to be. And so you probably experienced a lot of that with all the different people and tribal communities that you had to collaborate with. Like eventually there just became a point where it was like this spirit just set the whole exhibition into motion and made it what you guys see now. But yeah, I really appreciate and love your work that it can surround mine and kind of lighten that load.
I'm glad you brought that up because Yeah, I mean, it's something that I don't really talk about in front of non-native audiences, but you know, and other people have told me this too, other native people or other, you know, indigenous people, about just feeling the spirit in there. And, you know, having been a part of this project from the very beginning, there has been a lot of just serendipity, a lot of like, you can feel, you know, ancestors guiding the process as well. So it's not just, you know, we here, you know, and the living, it's our ancestors were so much a part of this whole process too, and helping to steer, and you know, just kind of, you know, things like, oh, I'm thinking about somebody or someone, and then they call me, or, you know, things like that, like, happened so much throughout this whole process. Um, I just realized too, we've got Potawatomi Pueblo, Potawatomi Pueblo. Um, so yeah, and you know, kind of I love that story, Brian, too, about freaking out the conservators, like any chance that we can to challenge those types of, you know, that process, those traditional Western, you know, processes of these, you know, institutions, you know, like that. I wish I was there in that moment as well, which actually Brian kind of freaked me out too, because he asked me one time to bring in a small pottery, and I had one at home, and then he poured water in it, and like at first I was just like, but I was like, oh no, you know what? No, that's meant to happen. That's meant to be. And I think, you know, with getting the sprinkle of, you know, moisture from Lake Michigan, you know, helping with the pots that you took outside, I think that's just, you know, it's so, again, you know, it's like these ancestors, you know, like working together, you know, to help us, right, and help guide us today. So I think we're almost out of time. So do you guys have any last thing you want, or last words you want to share? It could be anything.
You know, what's really great about this particular experience here at the field is it's happening in other places as well, and within other institutions, and you as artists, and of course there are just so many Native American, the creative spirit of Native America is alive and well, and many artists are also engaged with some of our flagship institutions throughout the country, and really helping to, again, shift this paradigm and to create systemic change within these institutions. I've had the opportunity to work with the Met in New York. I'm working with the De Young Museum in San Francisco and other institutions throughout the country, and really having these conversations, but also seeing that there is a willingness of a generation of museum professionals who have been connected with these institutions for long periods of time, who want to listen, who want to know, and who really want to be engaged in this process, or this move. I've been referencing it as a movement, in the ways in which, you know, museums are collaborating and partnering with Native people, and the ways in which they are stewarding these collections. And now I think one of the exciting things is with the revisions to the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which is the federal law that allows us to engage in repatriation, that this policy in a new form, I think, will generate more engagement with Native peoples, and that we'll see an increase in the return of ancestors, their associated funerary materials, and also items of cultural patrimony back to our tribes.
Yeah, that's really important too, that I think institutions begin to understand that we as people, we recognize the amount of knowledge that's contained within these institutions and the people that have done the research and have worked here for, you know, throughout their careers. But what we're starting to feel is like they're recognizing the wisdom that's embedded in our cultures, and that we are the experts on that simply because that's the people that we come from. So it seems like it's starting to balance out. Like all of their great knowledge is starting to be tempered with some of our humble wisdom. And that is going to make these institutions better places for the visitors and for the research that comes out of them and for the return home of these things that so badly should be back in our communities. So I know that your job wasn't always easy, trying to walk and find a balance between the institution and the people, but you did a good job. And I know a lot of people have told you that, but I think you need to continue to hear that if you're going to do the work, because these are really difficult positions and places to work in sometimes, even though there's a lot of good people working here.
Yeah, like anywhere you look, it's not going to necessarily be a great story with what's happened to Native people in this country and just around the world in general. So how do we heal from that? What are those steps looking like? And making sure that our voices are actually heard. And I think that's the other beautiful thing about this, is that it's not the museum telling these stories, it's Native people and the Native curators. And it turned out to be just so lovely. It's such a different feel, and just the actual like aesthetic with the woodwork as well, and the birch bark and the copper. It's very healing.
Wow, thank you all three of you, and Jason, thank you for almost making me cry. I appreciate that. I think, this is a really, actually, this is a really good, your last words here is a really good seg into also talking about, and I believe somebody will come up here from Illinois Humanities to talk about the work that they're also doing, and why you're all here today for the Big Read, and highlighting and promoting these Native authors too. So, when we talk about Native Voice, here's Native Voice right here with Natalie Diaz and Tommy Orange with their books that you guys are going to read if you haven't read already, and that others will have the opportunity to read. And then, bringing in Chef Jessica, or Chef Walks First, I believe is her professional handle. But and I think just having and showing this commitment to Native people is huge, and we see it. And it means a lot to us to to also be a part of this. I hope that you guys feel the same. And again, I just want to thank you all for accepting our invitation to come and speak, and sharing your experiences, and sharing some of those hard truths, right? When we talk about Native truths, sometimes they're hard truths, but you guys have to hear it. And so thank you so much for sharing your experiences with everybody. I love you guys. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so let's see, some questions. What do you see as the future of the Native Truths exhibition?
What I like about it are the central hubs that are intended to be kind of like act as rotating exhibitions. So if there's school groups coming through here, and maybe they come through every year, that there'll be fresh things for people to say and new stories. But also I think within that it will encourage the museum to continue reaching out into Native communities and making sure that these relationships that were forged with the exhibition weren't just some one-off, but somehow it's like continuing those relationships and enabling new stories to be told. So I think that's a pretty cool aspect of it.
There are definitely other exhibitions that need update as well. So, as you walked through, you could see that it was just the one exhibition hall, but we also have the Northwest Coast Alaska Native Hall, and then Ancient Americas as well. And Ancient Americas, even though it's not yet 20 years old, it's still, I feel, very outdated. So if you go into the Southwest section in the Ancient Americas, come back into Native Truths to see the Chaco story, and you'll see a dramatic difference, right? And that's what happens when you bring Native voice and you bring Native people guiding the process or telling the story. But, and that is something that we had been trying to push for is, renovating these other halls as well. And so I hope that we can push forward in changing those also.
Okay, I have another question. This is a great question. What was the role of joy in the curation process?
I think sometimes, at least for me personally, the role of joy was having a voice for so many people in my community that never had a voice, that had been disregarded and had our voice stolen from us for so many generations. So that was the joy, but there's also a sense of obligation and humility that comes with that. So yeah, the story that I told might have my name on the wall label, but it's so much more than just about me or what I created. It's about my grandfather, who's a 91-year-old elder in our community, and he's also a maker and an artist. But people, they didn't really ask him to do things. So when I go out there and speak or show my work, it's for a lot of people that never had that voice. There's a lot of joy in that.
In our Native American cultures, we're always told to be happy when we're doing things. And so joy is having that joy and just a good thought process and desire to do good work is just part of the way we do things. And one of the things that happens in our Native American Advisory Committee meetings is we always start off with a prayer in one of our indigenous languages, and that really sets the tone for the ways in which we go about our work then together, and calling our spirits and asking for guidance and protection and good health while we're here, but not only for ourselves but everyone else, every living being. and so I think there was great joy during those meetings, but also in the process of curating this exhibition, the installation of the items, the preparation of these items for display, and in the dialogue that was happening between the museum representatives, advisory committee members, the artists, and community members and others. And I think it really was a celebration of this time and our role and our responsibility really to do the best that we could so that this exhibit would be engaging, it would be informative, and it would share the joy, the prayers, and everything that went into the creation of it with everyone who steps into that gallery.
Thanks. I'm going to ask two more questions. What do you think the conservators at the Field Museum took away from the experience of working on this exhibit?
Some probably said that Brian Vio is crazy and is going against the grain where Western museology is concerned. And I'm serious. If you saw the looks on the faces of people as we were proposing things, they probably thought we were insane. Like, why would you even ask that? So I hope that as a result of that experience, that they're thinking differently then, because there is much to do in terms of conserving all of the items. How many were there in that original or that last exhibition?
About 1,500.
1,500 items, all damaged on some level. So there's a huge responsibility on the part of the museum now to be thinking about how best to approach conservation. If the particular tribe that is affiliated with these items feel that conservation is actually necessary. because some of us would say, just leave them alone, let them rest, don't do anything to them.
Yeah, that conservation, oh man, yeah. I think toward the tail end of the project, things started to change a little bit. And, you know, they were looking more toward like true collaboration with, different communities, artists. The photo that I just put up now is, one of our conservators that's in the conservation lab, working with Jason to repair a part of his piece. And so, now I think there is that kind of thinking of, like, yes, these folks are the experts. They know better than we do. So we should just step back and let them do whatever they need to do. I think there is still that larger conversation that has to be had around conservation on, yes, rather whether something should be preserved or conserved, whether something should just go back to the earth or disintegrate in the way that it's supposed to. But I think that's a broader conversation in the entire field that needs to be had. But, it's a hard conversation to have in places like these too, though.
The conservation team really shifted gears in a big way in preparing items for display. I think one of the most beautiful examples of that was the engagement of, was it Blackfeet? The women, if you saw the standing headdress that's on display, that was taken apart completely and reassembled for display with the conservatory team here at the Field Museum and the women from that tribe themselves. And those women, if you were here on opening day, were here wearing their headdresses as well and participating in the song and dance. And I thought that was just a really beautiful thing and a great example of how not only Field Museum, conservation, and curatorial teams, professionals, but others can learn from this experience and engage in similar ways.
So one last question, and it's actually just maybe only for Deborah. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the room we're in as a way to sort of punctuate the experience of being here and what it means for this conversation to be happening in this room.
Sure. So we are in what is called the Founders Room. This is actually the nicest room in the entire museum, a space that I like to reserve a lot, especially for Native community to come in and use. We are advisors, we meet in here with them, and I try to host events here for Native community members to indigenize this space. There was one year where I hosted a regional meeting for Citizen Band Potawatomi members, so their Midwest Eastern region. We all met in here, and it was so beautiful because rather than give a land acknowledgement to tell them where they're at, I welcomed them back home. And so I said, welcome home. And so this is Marshall Field up here. He's the founder of the Field Museum, so the Field Museum is named after him, and yes, it's Marshall Field, the department store millionaire. This was actually his brother Stanley Field's office. So this was one man's office. Stanley Field was the president of the Field Museum from 1908 to a little bit, maybe a couple decades. So we're in his office. The way that collecting happened back then and who was working here at the museum, very academic, anthropological. I don't believe that these men, I don't think these men ever believed that we would be here, that Black and Brown Indigenous people would be in this room today. And so that's why I love that we're taking up this space.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you all. Thank you, Monica, Brian, Jason, Deborah, for all of your words and for sharing your wisdom with us.